So the vast majority of information that we've collected in the world, everything from medical data to economic data to urban planning data, has been collected on men, and the result of that is that most things just don't work very well for women.
In een op de mannelijke maat ontworpen wereld delft de vrouw het onderspit. Zo weet schrijver en activist Caroline Criado Perez. En dat is de schuld van één man in het bijzonder.
Thank you very much for having me to come and speak here. I am baffled by this. It's amazing. Thank you very much for it. So I am here not to speak to you about my backdrop, but about a bias that we all have that affects me as well as you. And the impact, the very serious impact this bias has on how we collect and analyze data. I know, right? It sounds fascinating. It is fascinating, and I'm going to tell you why. So the vast majority of information that we've collected in the world and that we continue to collect, everything from economic data to medical data to urban planning data, has been collected on men. So male bodies and typical male lifestyle patterns. And that means that pretty much everything in the world, from the place that you work, to the transport you use to get there, to the phone that for some reason is not in any of your hands right now, to the apps on that phone, have all been designed to work for men. And that means that in everything from the workplace to the healthcare system, things just don't work very well for women. This is the gender data gap. Now, the first rule of the gender data gap, like Fight Club, but less fun, less dangerous. No, actually, more dangerous than Fight Club. I'm going there. Is that this is not done on purpose. This isn't a conspiracy, right? This isn't a group of evil misogynists who are like, I know how we're going to really screw with women. We're just not going to collect data on them, and that'll be really funny. Let's see what happens. That is not what the gender data gap is. It is simply the product of a way of thinking that goes back millennia, and therefore is a way of thinking that we aren't aware that we're doing. So this way of thinking is centered around a very good friend of mine called Reference Man. Reference Man is the worst superhero of all time. His superpower, which is to represent everyone. He is very bad at this, and this is because Reference Man is a man. He's a Caucasian man, around 70 kilograms. The result of Reference Man is that things work very well if you're a reference man, not so much if you're not. Now, Reference Man has been around for a very long time. It goes all the way back to Aristotle, who in the 4th century BC was writing a biological treatise called On the Generation of Animals, and he said that the first departure from type is indeed that the offspring should become female instead of male. The female was a mutilated male body. It was an aberration, but he allowed that females should be allowed to exist because we need it for the procreation of the species. So thank you very much, Aristotle. It's very kind of you to allow us to exist. This carried on through to the Renaissance, where there was an explosion of medical illustrations. And again, you had the female was the male turned inside out. The ovaries were the female testicles. The uterus was the female scrotum. And basically the female was just the male gone slightly wrong. And the reason the female was the male gone slightly wrong was that women lacked vital heat. Our bodies are too cold, and that's why we have to have our reproductive organs up here, safe inside our bodies, whereas men, because they're the right amount of heat, get to have them drop down outside the bodies, which is the proper way to have it, the standard human way to have it. Of course, you could look at this the other way and say that maybe men have too much heat, and that's why they have dropped down outside their body, which is clearly an inferior place to have such sensitive organs, I would suggest. But anyway, that's not what they thought in the Renaissance. They thought that this was the way to do things. Anyway, this carried on through to the 20th century. And there was a very influential Swiss architect called Le Corbusier, and he came up with this radical revolution in architecture, which was that we should design buildings around humans. Buildings are for humans, they should fit humans. We should use humans, the human scale, to design buildings. The problem with the human scale is that it was not the human scale, it was the man scale. specifically a 6-foot British police detective. He did specify this. You know, I know I'm British, but this isn't me saying this. This is Le Corbusier, so take it up with him, except, of course, he's dead. But anyway, he felt that the British police detective was who we should design buildings around. Someone did suggest to him at some point, maybe you'd like to include women, female police detectives, but he wasn't having any of that. He rejected the female body as a source of proportional harmony. Women are too unharmonious. Now, I am sure that you're all thinking, okay, but this was a really long time ago now. Surely we've moved on. We no longer think that women are too unharmonious to factor into design, to collect data on. That's very sweet of you. I appreciate that you think that my body is not too weird to measure. Unfortunately, that opinion is not shared by most designers and most medical researchers. So, for example, car design is still designed around reference man. So the car crash test dummy that we've used for decades has been based on the 50th percentile male. And of course, that means that the car crash test dummy is too big and too heavy and different in all sorts of ways, and doesn't really work for women very well. And that is not the only problem. There is also the issue of seatbelts, which haven't been designed to accommodate breasts, for example. You also have, well, this is because of the car crash test dummy, seats are too firm for most women. This isn't a comfort thing. This is that women get thrown further forward if they're in a car crash, because it's meant to be accommodating a weight that's much heavier. Women also tend to sit further forward in order to reach the pedals, which I think is a very important part of driving. But what that does is it puts them outside of what's called the standard seating position, the seating position that reference man will be in, and it puts them at a much higher risk in a frontal collision. Plus, of course, they're being thrown forward by the seat. The result of all of this is that women are 47% more likely to be seriously injured and 17% more likely to die if they're in a car crash than a man. Now, the good news is that the EU belatedly realized that women exist in 2015. Hooray! Unfortunately, it wasn't quite that. They realized that scaled-down men exist, so they introduced a scaled-down male dummy. And women are not scaled-down men, FYI. And on top of that, they still were using the 50th percentile male dummy as the reference dummy. So the scaled-down male dummy was used in is used, I should say, in 1 out of the 5 regulatory tests. Not all 5, only 1 out of 5. It's for the weird people, not the standard people. And only in the passenger seat. So what that means, scaled-down men can now sit in the passenger seat and feel very confident about that they probably should not drive, because we haven't got any data on that. Reference man also still exists in healthcare. Now, this really shocked me when I found out. You would think that scientific research on bodies would include female bodies, but you would be wrong, because female bodies are seen as too complicated to measure. And what I get told by medical researchers is that, well, the menstrual cycle will interfere with the results. Yes, it will, and that's why you want to study it. So far, we've found menstrual cycle effects for antihistamines, antipsychotics, antidepressants, heart medication. In fact, women are more likely to experience drug-induced heart rhythm abnormalities, which is itself a result of not testing medication in women, and they're more likely to experience it during the first half of their menstrual cycle. It's the kind of thing that you might want to study before you release a drug onto the market, but apparently too complicated. Let's just pretend it doesn't happen. Reality is too complicated for medical science, apparently. So now, as well as arguing that women are too complicated to measure, what some medical researchers have said to try and shut me up is, well, okay, we hear you. What we'll do is we'll start off in men, and then if we find anything interesting in the standard people, we'll add women later and see if it works in the weird people too. Now, the problem with that is that sometimes things may not work in men that would have worked in women. So, for example, there was a study done in cells. Now, you may be aware that cells don't have a menstrual cycle, so you can't really use that excuse for cells, but for some reason we're still testing in male cells rather than female cells. Anyway, this one study was testing in both male and female cells. And they exposed both the male and female cells to estrogen, and then they exposed them to a virus. The male cells were not able to use the estrogen to fight off the virus. The female cells were. You see the problem with if we start off in males and then if we find anything interesting, we'll add females? It doesn't work. Similarly, if you aren't looking at male and female cells or bodies or animals or in any way separately what's called sex disaggregating your data. You waste a lot of time and money because there may be differences. And if you don't know what the differences are, you'll just think the cells are unpredictable. And this is, in fact, what happened when researchers were looking at muscle-derived stem cells. They were really confused. These stem cells, they just don't act rationally. They are totally unpredictable. Turned out they're not unpredictable. It's just that male cells don't promote regeneration, and female cells do. How much time and money did we waste looking at regeneration of stem cells when we could have just been realizing what was going on by sex disaggregating the data? Such a simple thing, and we still don't do it. What I want to conclude with is basically a plan that we're all going to enact. Everyone in the room here today is going to enact this plan. And basically, it's a murder. Don't worry, it's only a reference man, and he's a very bad guy. It's 2019, and reference man has been killing women for decades. So I think it's time that we killed him off, because I think he deserves it. And I hope you all agree with me. So thank you very much. It's been great to be here.
Ik vond het wel heel leuk om te horen. Ik ben namelijk zelf arts en ik heb onderzoek gedaan. En zij noemden dat we eigenlijk in de geneeskunst en in het doen van onderzoek vrouwen compleet eigenlijk negeren. In die zin dat we de data alleen van mannen gebruiken. En toen zat ik na te denken tijdens de talk. En toen dacht ik heb volgens mij in mijn onderzoek nooit gelet op man-vrouw verschil. En ook in de spreekkamer, ik word huisarts, als ik dingen voorschrijf of bespreek of bijwerkingen, dan denk ik ook nooit eigenlijk na over bijvoorbeeld cyclus van een vrouw. En dat leren we ook helemaal niet. Dus het is ook misschien niet zo raar dat ik dat niet doe. Maar ik dacht, volgens mij is dat echt een heel groot issue inderdaad. En ga ik daarop letten?
Absurd. Het is totaal gestoord dat het zo in elkaar zit. En ja, daar moet je wat aan doen. En ik als reference man, en ik ben ongeveer voor mij best wel een reference man, dan is het voor mij de wereld wel makkelijk. Maar het is juist dat je dan een keer buiten die gendernormen verder gaat kijken.
Zelf de opnames van Brainwash Talks bijwonen? Kijk op brainwashfestival.nl.
Human.